Good morning, everyone. Alright, so my name is Ezra Ashley, and I'm presenting confronting the contemporary local and regional challenges to sustainable development in SIDS. Now, I'm not an economist. I take this from a sociological perspective, so it's not a disclaimer, but I just want you to understand my shaping of the issue, how I view this. So the objectives of this presentation will be to explore the concept of sustainable development and SIDS, or small island development states, to examine some of the challenges for sustainable development in SIDS, and to propose a way forward. Right. So what is development? So development is really seen as a concept or ideology where we look to promote societal maturity. And one thing that is important to note about this concept is that even though that states and nations they desire to be developed, there is no agreed upon idea or approach to development. And in development, in understanding development, there have been different eras or different evolution of development. So there was first the post-colonial ideology of development, where in the 1960s, where states became newly independent. So they were now setting their course, the way forward, and this era focused mainly on promoting economic development. And there was also, most notably, the post-9/11 concept or era of development, where a more holistic approach to development was taken, and it was taken through the Millennium Development Goals. So how did we get to sustainable development? So sustainable development, the idea of sustainable development came about in the late 1970s, where the world leaders were looking to really watch how they, or examine how they choose to develop, and to do it in a more ecological sense. So it was really the desire to strike a balance between the effective management of the environment and also social equity. So this concept really, the definition for this concept would be sustainable development is meeting current needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So really see this idea of intergenerational play, where we see the generation of now, the present generation, and future generations. Also, in understanding sustainable development, there's also no agreed upon definition of what sustainable development is. Nor is there any agreed upon definition of how you go about it in a practical sense. So we have the theoretical perspective of what sustainable development is, but there's no agreed upon practical execution of how it should be achieved. Alright, so my paper was shaped based on constructivism theory, which is a sociological theory which focuses on how the world is constructed. So we believe that the world is constructed based upon concepts and ideas and beliefs and values. So that I'm looking at the idea of sustainable development and small island development state in terms of how these concepts interact with each other. So it's also important to know that even though there's the concept, or we construct our reality, we have to be conscious of the natural reality. So our reality is made up of our constructs as well as our natural surroundings. The methodology, I took a phenomenological approach, really looking at how the idea of sustainable development, how did we come about it, and really what does it really mean in a practical sense, and also the idea of small island development state, what is it in reality. So in terms of small island development states, we realized that one of the issues that I realized was that when we speak about small island development states, we usually find them, or as I like to think about it, confine them, dependent on their stature. So usually they are defined based upon their population size, their economic capacity, and their surface area. So we look here that this category of state, of developing state, is really confined or defined based on their stature, right? And in the idea of sustainable development, we see where we have to meet the needs of the present generation as well as the future, and the focus of this generation is really the world's poorest. And we see in this idea of limitations, there's also this idea of limitation, based upon technological advances, so how available is modern technology for the state, as well as the idea of social organization, their functional social institutions in the country, as well as environmental capacity, how much or what is capable within the confines of this geographical area. So I looked at the example of St. Vincent and the Grenadines when in the Rio Plus 20 report, national report, the country noted that one of their obstacles for sustainable development is small size of the market, as well as finite natural and human resources. So this has contributed to a lethargic economic perspective in the society. So we see this idea of, because of the limited land space, as well as competing interests within the country, that there is this idea of limits placed on a small island developing states. So underlying any term of sustainable development is this idea of limits. So you have to limit your consumption so that you can provide for future generations. And also in the idea of small island developing states, there's the idea of limits in terms of their stature, what they are capable of doing. Environmental protection and sustainable development. So we see here that for small island development state, so in looking at sustainable development, there's the desire to better treat with the environment as well as to protect the environment, because we know that human can cause irreversible damages to the environment that is long term. So the idea of the sustainable development came about or tried to enforce domestic commitment as well as international coordination in order to produce an environment or produce development that will be beneficial to both present and future generations. But in looking at the concept or looking at the idea of small island developing states, we see that the environment is really inherently linked to the lives of these people, because we are so close to our environment as small island developing states. So, but at the same time, we face a number of threats that are both endogenous and exogenous, which means that they're internal or external, as well as natural and human threats. So while we are so close to our environment, we face all these threats at the same time. And also we have seen lately with the rise of climate change has exacerbated the intensity and the frequency of natural disasters. And the Caribbean, just know that the Caribbean is seen as the second most prone hazard area. So for this section, I look at the example of Montserrat. Really, in sustainable development, they speak about it protecting the environment, but how do we protect the environment, or how do we treat the environment after natural disaster? So there was a volcanic eruption in 1997, and 2/3 of the island was rendered uninhabitable. So what was left with the population, half of the population migrated and half remained. So what they had to do is see how one of the limitations here in sustainable development is how do we go forward after a natural hazard? How do we treat with these states after a natural hazard? So you see this gap in the concept of sustainable development. The socio-economic implications of sustainable development. Right? So in sustainable development, there is the desire as well to strike an equilibrium between social and economic processes. So this is done by ensuring that there's equity and a good standard of living for all citizens, and also in promoting the development of human resources, so training your national or your human capabilities. But when we look at sustainable development, we see the conflict of, because they have minimum resources, minimum economic resources, there are challenges in getting the finances needed to train the personnel. So in looking at the Caribbean as CARICOM as a region, we see that there is this gap in terms of the population. Is the population really capable of developing, or is the population being engaged and challenged enough to really take up these new job opportunities to develop their country? And also we see in terms of migration as an issue, as well as the problems with CARICOM as a regional bloc, as well as the CSME, getting the CSME to work in such a way that will allow for the free movement of goods and people and capital. So just to recap, I looked at the concept of development, sustainable development and SIDS, and explore some of the challenges, or some of the challenges to sustainable development. So how do we go forward? So in looking forward, I really want to propose an alternative to sustainable development. I believe that development works best when it's tailored for the national state, the specificities of the state. And what we usually do, we usually take development agendas from states. We just take them wholesale and we don't adapt it and develop it and tailor it to the national particularities of the state. So in looking at diaspora engagement, we see that the diaspora is that one person described it as the feeling of belonging to both here and there. So even though that you're not physically in your country, you're still contributing to your country. So in looking at diaspora engagement, is really a holistic approach to development. So in recommending how do we go about diaspora engagement, really looking at mapping your diaspora. Where is your diaspora located? What are the resources that your diaspora has? And what can they do? Are they willing to engage in the country's development? Also, we look at creating a diaspora policy. So this diaspora policy needs to have the role and responsibility of the diaspora, as well as the rights. So you're making it that in such a way that there's mutual benefits for both the homeland, the host country, the country that is the sending country, and the migrants, as well as to tap into economic remittances. So we see that these economic remittances, are a great source of, and a sustainable source of foreign direct investment into a country. Also the creation of a migration ministry or department that could coordinate the interaction and the engagement of the diaspora should be looked at, as well as something called brain share. Brain share where there's neither brain loss or brain gain, but because the diaspora is so engaged in both the homeland and the host land, the capabilities and the expertise of the diaspora is available to both areas, as well as diaspora being the drivers of foreign policy. So these are just my suggestions on how we could really rethink this idea of development, because we look at it based on what is given to us, but I think we need to move away from that and move at looking at within our capabilities, look at within ourselves to see what we can do to help our country develop. Thank you.
Hi, good morning everyone. Thanks for joining this session. My topic again is the planning approach to city competitiveness and sustainability. The objective today would be to cover urban planning, some history, urban planning specifically to Trinidad and Tobago, competitive and sustainable urban planning, understanding the purpose of competitiveness and understanding the place branding used in cities. And then I will go specifically to present the case of Sugarlands as an aspiring city in Trinidad and Tobago. Is planning has been around as early as human settlement itself. These monumental structures displayed there still stand today, back with their penetrating historical background, attracting tourists and business interests, whilst being the feature, pride, and joy of its citizens in where it's displayed today. Trinidad and Tobago urban planning system inherited its design from the British in colonial times. Since then, the Twin Islands state has been seen many changes economically, structurally, socially, and environmentally. These changes have been unsatisfied by the colonial type system and have resulted in many urban planning problems such as flooding, improper drainage, some illegal building structures, informal housing settlements, and several other repressed urban issues has been found in its current and developing cities. To address this problem, many sub-initiatives have been undertaken by the government, who has recently developed a national spatial development strategy to help provide some remedial solutions. Some projects include the development of the East Port of Spain. The East Port of Spain Development Company is one such initiative, which is located in the East Port of Spain spectrum. Specifically, competitive and urban planning. The purpose of this study is to show an integrated approach in including urban planning systems to achieve competitiveness and sustainability in cities for a country. Shibbona's Borough has shown evidence of becoming a city in Trinidad and Tobago and has seen a trajectory growth over the last decade, currently hosting a population base of approximately 83,000 persons. Shibbona's has been chosen to be the demonstration case of my study, using comparative analysis of existing international case studies. Why do we want to be competitive? To attract a skilled workforce, to attract and maintain a skilled workforce, to attract investments and foster business-friendly environments, to attract tourists, to be a preferred destination, and to maintain and improve the quality of lives for our residents. Basically, the key here is to stand out from the rest. Why brand a city? Research has shown that cities are the reservoirs of capital and skilled labor. Cities can be the drivers of employment, centers for education, business hubs, culture, innovation, information, communication attractors. Cities have successfully applied models of customer product branding as a method to compete in today's global marketplace. Some branding variables include image. Image is is usually the perception of the brand that exists in the mind of an individual or audience. An opinion emerges from the audience perception, which can be either positive or negative. And it is for this reason branding can be a factor for making a place famous. For example, the love story behind the famous Taj Mahal or the romance of Venice. Another branding variable I use in my study is identity. The notion of identity is central to place branding, where a distinction is made between the place identity and brand identity. Place identity consisting of cultural, historical, economic, political factors that contribute to the development of a place, while brand identity implies a strategy that seeks to reinforce a positive attribute or improve the reputation. For example, Trinidad has seen to promote the image of Carnival being the greatest show on earth and Trinidad being the home of Carnival. Urban planning in cities and place branding. There has been found there is no fixed approach to branding a city. Setting a developmental goal such as to be an investment capital or preferred tourist destination, cities can there construct its individual planning strategies around these goals. Place branding can therefore take a sustainable approach with urban planning and will be illustrated in the following cases. For New York, These are some examples of city logos and images used in the city. Branding efforts. New York, Paris, and Berlin are case studies which have been chosen to demonstrate the branding approach. New York has gained the popularity for its branding techniques using visual identity and launching a brand campaign The I Love New York is one of the most popular and successful branding efforts used. This city has gone so far as to obtain a legal registration for its logo. This visual identity is a sub-component of place identity and ultimately a place branding variable. In 2012, New York City saw a 2.1 increase of 52 million tourists from 2011. Paris, which is another strong branding model, uses landmarks and artworks as its branding strategy and as a result become quite popular today. Paris has been originally built on a series of axes which are structured around a cross and has a unique history few can measure against. Paris has been found to have some most memorable monumental architectural works, academic and finest artworks. The cultural architectural attractions of Paris, such as the Eiffel Tower, the Notre Dame and Opera, are some of the most famous sites. Paris has been nicknamed the City of Light, which contributes to its intellectual prominence and appearance. Berlin is one of Europe's younger cities and has not been as established. Currently, they are working between using a special type of branding from its history of negative involvement of its war and genocide. So that has been a bit some struggle at this point in time for Berlin. So they're still working out a brand strategy. But I included it in the study so that you get an idea in terms of the challenges that cities or development cities can face. The aspiring city of Chabonis, the city of opportunities as some call it, has been targeted for its growth in the last decade and favored for its development capabilities. Chabonis has been found to display branding ingredients such as getting support from the government initiatives, evidenced by the construction and development of universities, training institutions, as well as improvement and redesign of its existing areas. Heritage and recreational sites are already in existence. Commercial building structures, which can be used for potential business hubs, and there are also many other attractors that can be found. This slide here just shows some of the government initiatives that are currently undergoing near Amsterdam Boulevard, the site for the Chabonis Library, and then the Costa main campus and some other institutions. Here in this slide shows the Lighthouse, a restaurant, a snapshot of a restaurant on Amsterdam Street and a recreational park. These are some of the recreational and cultural attractors in Chabonis. And lastly, these are some commercial spaces just displayed in several areas in Chabonis. In conclusion, cities, in order for countries to respond adequately to threats of globalization, technical change, and urban decay, cities need to run themselves like a business, creating a brand that can attract investors, tourists, events, and talent. This is especially important for small island developing states, which are already at a disadvantage given their size, voicelessness, and economic vulnerability. The driving force behind every successful city is its people. Each resident is a walking, talking advertisement proponent for a city brand. A successful city enjoys the advantage of loyal residents who consistently help reinforce, promote its positive brand image. An effective brand strategy will strategically incorporate and utilize this medium of advertisement and promote the city beyond a possible destination for leisure to the extent that the city becomes inseparable from its brand and its people. When place branding is incorporated to urban planning methods for sustainable development, it has shown to increase the city's competitiveness, helping to create and promote attractive business-friendly climate, and as well as foster a high quality of life for its residents. In Chaguanas, adopting a place branding approach would or is suggested to target an increase in local, regional, and international competitiveness through its infrastructure, investment climate, cultural heritage, and its strategic location between two current cities. Thanks.
So, hello everybody. I'm not an economist. My PhD is in performance studies. However, in my presentations, I'm always advocating for the arts as a venue or as a medium for other disciplines to intersect or collaborate with each other. 2 years ago, I was in a staff meeting here, and a gentleman from the engineering department got up, and he addressed everybody, including the principal, and he said, "What are we going to do when we run out of oil? Because right now what we're extracting is sand." And there was dead silence. But at that moment, what popped in my mind was, how can we as artists think of an industry that can not substitute, that would be very ambitious, but in a way address the economic challenges of the future. So I thought of Carnival as that kind of an industry. My paper changed the title a little bit. Now it's Caribbean Sustainable Development, Economics of Carnival. And so what I'm trying to say here is how can not only involve Trinidad and Tobago, but the whole Pan-Caribbean basin in this sort of initiative to create out of Carnival an economic enterprise. So I say that Carnival has retail and wholesale value. Clarence Jagrup calls it carniomics, this combination of Carnival and economics. And I say that Carnival is a Pan-Caribbean economic enterprise with retail and wholesale value for the tourist industry because of the profits it generates. So one of the flaws, I think, in our program here at the university is that we prepare our students, for example, to perform on stage. They get the degree, but then they don't know what to do with it. So, excuse me. So this could be, an idea of how we can make our students think about how they can sell what they know in a way that is economically efficient. And not only that, also how they can contribute to the economics of the island. Usually what we do is we ask for grants, subsidies, but we never think of ourselves as generators of wealth or profit. So the connection with Carnival is the tourist industry. As an outsider, when I go to Carnival, I realize that it's a very local thing. Although it's a very famous Carnival, the population that participates in Carnival continues to be very local. So what I say is that if we generate an interest in tourists to come to the island during that season, the profit of Carnival overall will probably increase. And the reason why I say this is because there's a Cuban-American essayist who already died, who talks about, in his book, The Repeating Island, those things about being Caribbean that makes us uniquely alike. And one of those things, the previous presenter was talking about famous cities in Europe and other attractions in the world that attract a lot of people. And I say we don't have a pyramids, we don't have Torre Eiffel, we don't have any of that, but we have Carnival, which is, in a way, a world wonder. We take it for granted because we are the participants of it. But Carnival takes place almost in every island. And even those islands that never had a tradition of Carnival have created a Carnival. For example, the Cayman Islands. They have implemented Carnival through a private enterprise, a Rotary Club, because they said, if we're Caribbean, we must have a Carnival, which they didn't have before. I think it's called the Batabano Festival. So this gentleman, whose name is Antonio Benitez Rojo, in his book, The Repeating Island, talks about the social-cultural density of Carnival. So he's saying that Carnival is such an important event because of its social-cultural density, which is the influx of people from all ethnicities, all races, all cultural backgrounds, all economic strata. And so he establishes a proportion, which is the higher the social-cultural density of Carnival, the greater it is. So what I'm saying is, the higher the social-cultural density of Carnival, the more market value it has. But how we generate this social-cultural density, if it's not through bringing into the islands, during Carnival, visitors from other cultures, other countries, that will feel inclined to participate in the cultural event Carnival is. So I'm not talking about predators. I'm not talking about people who come here to, go to the resorts, have a good time, and have the margarita next to, their table. I'm talking about people who are interested in knowing who we are, and that will benefit from the experience of going from island to island during the Carnival season as a cultural experience, because they don't take it for granted, because they don't have it. So we're born dancing and among festivals, etc., and we take it for granted. But in many countries, this is not the reality. So how do we attract these people in these highly urbanized areas where they have these big buildings but no embodied experience of what's like to be in a festival, to come to the Caribbean where they can find all these things? So, I already mentioned that. Tourism as an industry. So how do we develop that? We don't have the infrastructure yet. Actually, in all the studies that I have researched, the initiatives are there. They have been published and documented, but they have not transcended the point of just talking about it and mentioning it. So I use different theories in economics who consider what economic development is to justify the development of Carnival as an enterprise. Why? Because I do not want Carnival to be perceived as another way in which we can be exploited. So I mentioned key ideas, and these key ideas go from developing fair trade, people who participate in Carnival at a very small type of business model, to governments, port authorities, hotels, cruise ships that can be involved in the whole process of developing the infrastructure. So all these theories coincide with the same set of ideas. Job creation, access to employment, sustainable development, environmental policies, etc., etc. So the main idea is, okay, how do we create this big enterprise without exploiting our people any further, and so that they benefit actually from the profit that generates Carnival. So why Carnival? Because what I'm related to in my field is performance studies. So I could not talk about the whole gamut of events that go on within that frame, but I could talk about, for example, the bands, because that's what concerns me as a performance studies specialist. And the extra large bands, for example, there's a system of classifications in the mass system, the mass band system. and the large bands make a great amount of money every carnival. So I'm using this as a reference to say, okay, if this happens, how can we not make this work for us? So again, how can we generate an interest for people to visit the island when this is happening so that the social density takes place, and therefore not only they benefit from our experience, but Carnival historically has been this open frame type of event that is inclusive. So we also benefit from it. Because our life as islanders usually is very limited in terms of how we expose ourselves to the outside. So we're bringing them in. And this exchange can be very enriching too, culturally. So there are economic limitations. As I mentioned, there's a lack of infrastructure. And one of the things that people fear outside of Trinidad is crime. So how do we take care of that? When I first came here to work, everybody said, are you really want to go to Trinidad to work? You know what that is like? And it's a myth. It's a myth. Because I travel, I walk home every day, I travel by Maxi, and no one ever has done anything to me. I'm not saying that my experience can be generalized, but what I'm saying is that sometimes, those branches of media that benefit from taking out of proportion events that happen in terms of crime, robbery, and things like that, don't do us a favor. So, how can we overcome that, attract people to Carnival without them fearing that they're going to be in jeopardy? So that's one of the main economic limitations I find. Lack of infrastructure and the situation with crime. So how do we overcome these limitations? Creating different infrastructure. And I'm saying, okay, I'm proposing, for example, the cruise ships. They come out of Miami, they have routes all over the Caribbean. So those exist already. They go from island to island. And I'm saying, how can we group the Carnival celebration in those islands and make them match with the routes that already exist? Convince the cruise lines that this is a profitable business. Not only the casinos on board and all that goes on, but bringing people, sometimes these journeys are like 9 to 10 days. Bring people ashore and complete that journey with an embodying, a stimulating, culturally enriching experience. So this is a route that I'm showing as an example of how it happens. And then I propose a calendar of groupings sample in my paper showing how this can happen. Then I go into some theoretical considerations, and I use for this a study that was done in Calabar, Nigeria, where they also tried to develop Carnival out of popular celebrations in Nigeria. The same type of study. So I use it as a reference to, pinpoint some of the theoretic commonalities between what they did and what we may do in the future. And what I use is a functional approach, which is an approach that considers precisely how do you develop something without exploiting, those who are in the process of developing it. So as a conclusion, I must say that this research has brought me to more questions than answers. And in that, I thank Professor Franklin for advising me. But that's what research is about. It's about taking risks, proposing an idea that may find lots of resilience, go out of the box, and it may happen that someone believes it, takes it up, and develops it, because in the back of all of that, what there is a genuine desire to use something that we do so festively to develop something that is needed, which is an economic outlet to the situations that we may encounter in the future in Trinidad and Tobago, but also in the rest of the Caribbean. Thank you.